Hey guys, Gary over at Strippo. Just wanted to show you another way to use QCS. Now for some of the bigger, higher volume shops, a strip tray like this is called a flow-on or flow-over strip tray. It's common practice. It's kind of an industry standard in a lot of ways to efficiently strip furniture. You put it in, you pretty much give the piece a bath without submerging it. Dipping has sort of fallen out of the grace of the public for a lot of reasons. But this is still kind of a common practice way of stripping. It's what we've done for years at a restoration shop, and it works really well. So you pretty much soak everything, scrub it, all of the runoff comes into the tray, and then it comes down, flows out of just a drainage hole in the corner and down into a reservoir to then be reused again and again. You have to filter now and then, and there's evaporation with methylene chloride, so you have to kind of keep adding. QCS works great in a flowover system, and I'm going to show you how we use it in our old flowover. All right, so we have the pneumatic style flowover pump. There's an electric version. Pretty much it just pulls the liquid from the reservoir through the pump that's below and then out of this brush. You could change the pressure. It's hooked up to an air compressor. But this is actually QCS. It's a little dirty. It's not as crystal clear as you would get it in a bottle, but this is QCS coming through our flowover system, and it works great. There's no changes need to be made, nothing. Frankly, you don't even need the galvanized steel tray anymore because it's not corrosive. So you could actually use something completely different and avoid needing the costly galvanized tray as long as it kind of acts the same way. You know, you have the drain in the in the corner where everything pitches that way, and then you just need the pump. QCS does react a little bit with PVC, so you want to make sure any tools or anything you're using with QCS is not PVC, because it can cause some mild issues with PVC, especially with extended use. So you wouldn't want a pump that has a lot of PVC parts, or you wouldn't want to use a tray or anything made out of PVC. But other plastics have no issue. Polypropylene is awesome. I mean, that can withstand a lot anyway, but a lot of plastics will do fine. So pretty much with a flowover system, you are just gonna take and wet the surface of the furniture and just get an even coat over everything. So the brush actually acts as your applicator. You just kind of wet everything, and then from there you're gonna let it sit and come back and scrub it. So I'll show you what that's like. All right, so everything has been soaked. I'm just gonna let it sit now. Here's some really cool things about QCS. So in other videos we've posted on Instagram and everything else, I've said some of this before, but here's a few of the pros of QCS. Number one is the odor. There's no carcinogens, there's no toxicity, or extremely low toxicity, I should say, almost nothing. It passes every California regulation. There's no EPA regulations, no OSHA regulations. DOT regulations are not a problem. You could, send it anywhere. Those are really the pluses. But in this setting, all I have is a fan blowing. Normally, with methylene chloride or any harsh chemicals, it can overwhelm a space. So like in New England, where our restoration shop is, I mean, in the wintertime, when you're all sealed up in a building, I mean, that can be very, very overwhelming. You've got to have masks, you got to have gloves and all the safety gear. With with QCS, you bypass so much of that. It's so much healthier for you in that regard. The other big plus is that though QCS is more expensive, in a system like this, if you were to go drum for drum, just the price, it is more expensive, but you get at least 5 times the usage out of QCS because it doesn't evaporate. There's no water in the formula, so that helps you for two reasons. Number one is it doesn't evaporate, so it stays wet on the surface, and you're not going to lose product just as you're circulating it through the system and it's evaporating. You won't get that. You'll get very, very little loss when it comes to the product, and it'll continue to work. It doesn't really lose potency, which is also a really big plus. And the other thing too is that as it gets older and it gets a little bit thick with kind of the old finishes and stuff that you're removing, you just put it aside, let the solids settle to the bottom, and then just pour off from the top, and you'll have thin, usable QCS again, and you'll just have the little bit of solids on the bottom. In addition to that, it's biodegradable, it's non-flammable, so you don't have to worry about alcohol-based strippers that can cause some serious flame issues, combustion, ignition. You don't have to worry about you know, the environment and what you're doing there, because the product itself is super safe for the environment. So it can be, you know, even just poured down the drain in its pure form. Obviously, as you add, you know, finishes and things you're removing from it, or into it, I should say, that you're using the QCS to remove, then you're kind of changing that. So you have to kind of, you know, look at your local regulations as far as the disposal of that goes. You may need to, you know, filter it somehow, but as far as the product itself, it will be a lot less expensive to get rid of the waste, and it may actually, you know, you may only have to just get rid of the solids that settle and not have to worry as much about the whole volume of product. Another big plus. I won't necessarily say anything because I don't need to. You get the idea. I can leave my hand in here for pretty much as long as I want. It's not gonna burn. It's not gonna hurt my skin. Again, everyone has different sensitivities, so I'm showing you this. I don't recommend that you go without gloves, but you could see here, this is not burning. Methylene chloride would start burning skin. By now, you would feel a lot of tingling, let's say, for the sake of a better word. You don't have to worry about that. So it's really safe in that sense too. So breathing it in, touching it, I mean, I can handle the furniture and move it around. I don't have to worry about the burns, the chemicals, things like that. So that's also a huge plus if you're using it every day. Okay, so now for sort of the, I'll say, downside. We'll use that term. If you are set up like this, a traditional kind of medium to larger volume shop, and you've got your strip trays, and you've got a tray like this, they're typically 5x9, 4x8, somewhere in that range. Generally, there are other custom types that others have, but that's the general off-the-shelf style tray. You put a couple pieces in, like you see here. You've got your, you know, this little coffee table here and this bench. QCS will take longer. It's going to take you longer as far as the soaking goes. But if you view your labor at your shop as only time you're working on it, it's not a big deal. The only issue you have is if you're trying to get X amount of pieces done in a day. If that's the case, and you're looking at how many things you can get completed, you have to change your thinking a little bit. So what we do is, when we're stripping multiple items, we try to say, okay, let's say we wanted to do these pieces and maybe 4 other pieces today. We wanted to get those stripped. Obviously, this is going to have to sit in here for a while, so the other pieces are just sitting without getting any QCS on them until they come into the tray. Well, that's the problem. So you've got to set up a little differently. That's where we'll often pre-treat pieces with the spray bottles, do something like that. Pre-treat it. Outside is great in the nice weather. Again, any runoff and anything like that can be hosed off. It's not going to hurt the soil or the environment. So, you know, you could put it outside on some folding tables or up on sawhorses, pre-soak it, get the QCS working. Then by the time you're able to move these pieces along, you can put the others in, and they're already, you know, on their way. So you don't have to wait as long. But that is going to be something that you have to kind of retrain yourself in. Is it's not going to react like methylene chloride like almost instantaneously. You're going to have to let it soak for a little bit longer than that. Soaking times are going to vary based on the finish. So if it's an older antique finish like a shellac, or it's maybe a nitrocellulose lacquer, you know, some old varnishes, things like that, that might come off pretty quickly. You may not have to wait that long. If you have modern finishes, you're going to run into some problems. QCS is really is formulated for more vintage and antique type finishes. You know, if you're stripping things from 20-30 years ago and on, you're going to run into pre-catalyzed lacquers, post-catalyzed lacquers, and conversion varnishes. You know, even some of the polyurethanes and such, all those, the 2K polys, it's not going to do well on those. It's going to struggle. You could get it off potentially if you just let it soak a very long time, but it's probably not going to be your best product for that. We're actually going to be working on some other formulas that the chemistry is designed for those, but we're not there yet. We're starting off with QCS, and we're going to go from there. But it's perfect for older finishes, so that's that. Yeah, so the key is really just keeping it wet, and that's the same if you're using it by the spray bottle, the QCS. You want to keep the surfaces wet. It's going to work better that way. If you let it dry out, it doesn't evaporate, it just sort of re-solidifies in a way. So you want to just keep misting it if you're using the spray bottle. Keep the surfaces kind of just wet and dampened. They don't have to be saturated. Like in here, everything gets a lot wetter than if you're doing it, you know, with a spray bottle. But you don't need to saturate everything. You just want to keep it wet so it's activated and working. So I've set a timer. I'm gonna let you know how long it takes roughly to do these two pieces. And that's soaking time. And I'll try to give you the difference between soaking time and actual labor. Labor is when I come in and start scrubbing and cleaning the pieces. That's billable labor. Soaking, the product's working and I'm not. I'm going and doing something else. So I'll get back to you on that. All right, guys, it's been about 40 minutes since this has been soaking. This top had sort of a thick recoated finish. I think this has been refinished at some point, this coffee table. The bench is seeming to be getting very close to being ready to scrub at this point. I scrubbed the seat a second ago just a little bit and it seemed like the finish is letting go. So what I'm looking for here now on this, I just want to see if it's starting to lift. You can see here, this finish on here, whatever this was, yeah, see it's still on there. I think somebody recoated it with like a polyurethane, and it was visibly thicker than what was on the legs of the piece. So I'm gonna let this sit a little longer, again, not wasting time on the piece. I'm gonna let it sit, but you can see that it stays pretty wet just sitting here, and you don't have to worry about walking away and it like staining the wood or anything because there's no water in the formula, so you can just wet it and walk away. All right, guys, just wanted to show you the final product on this bench and the table. So this bench stripped really well. It's pine, so you'll see there's just some moisture in the wood. QCS takes a little longer to dry, especially in softer wood, so you want to make sure you give it enough time before you get into finishing. On harder woods it'll dry much quicker, but on pine it sort of soaks in, and the longer you have to soak a piece, also the longer, the more it gets in, and it may need to just dry up a little bit more. So put it out in the sun, whatever you need to do, just let it kind of dry before you really get into finishing. Sand it, see if it kind of bleeds out at all. But overall, very clean. Just, it's a dirty piece. It's an antique, so there's a lot of blotchiness, but that's just the wood. The finish is completely gone. So there's. Now, just for full transparency, this is the top, and you can see it didn't really. This had been recoated at some point with something newer like a polyurethane, and it was really thick. And though it's soaked for a while, it's definitely starting to break down. You would probably be able to let it soak longer and it would probably work. But it had soaked a long time, and we moved on. We cleaned it and just realized that it's, there's still some finish there. Sometimes it's hard to tell when it's wet. So, again, just full transparency, QCS won't work on every finish, as quickly, or in some cases it won't work at all, depending if it's a newer finish or a really thick finish. Depends on the chemical makeup of the finish you're stripping. So the bench was a success. That stripped great. Again, if you were trying to hand sand all that or paste strip it, it would have been a nightmare. So it worked great on that, not so great on this table here. And just as kind of the final summary, we used, I'll show you the reservoir here. So we didn't add to this at all. This is the reservoir. You can kind of see that little line, I don't know if you see it, where you can see the level went down. It went down maybe an inch in the whole reservoir, or 3/4 of an inch. So barely any usage. That's one of the really nice things about QCS in the Flowover system. If you would have used methylene chloride, the amount of times we kept wetting this just to kind of keep it wet, you just lose so much in evaporation. So very little usage, and again, that can be used again and again. As far as actual labor time, it was about 2 hours roughly of actual labor, maybe less, hour and a half to 2 hours, somewhere in that range, to scrub this piece really good, to scrub this in the table and the base that went to it, but all the rest of it was soaking time. And soaking time was about 3 hours. We put it in at 12:45 in the afternoon, and then started scrubbing both pieces at about 3:45 and wrapped up at about 5:30. So that's kind of the timing of what it took. So we just let it soak for a while. Again, no labor there. Used very little product in the end. We still have a lot of it left, almost all of it, and just took you know, that hour and 45 minutes or whatever that is to scrub everything really good. There's a lot of, you know, it's not a detailed piece, but it is. I mean, you have all those spindles and everything, so it just takes some time. But it sure beats, again, paste strippers, chemicals, hand sanding, all of that. So a win there, sort of a mild loss here. We probably could have soaked this longer and gotten this off. But again, some pieces will be a home run, some won't. QCS isn't a silver bullet, but it sure does help on a lot of projects. So there you go.